When you say nation, you talk about land. Our land is Africa. That's undeniable. This land is not our land.
That what Frantz Fanon's theory, psychological theory, is that we're in a post-colonial psychology. And what he calls that is an auto-destructional stage, which is the oppressor will oppress for so long that the oppressed no longer have to be physically oppressed. They do it to themselves automatically.
I'm black. Do you hear me, man? Do you understand? I am black. I'm a nigga. You understand me? I was born black. I live black. And I'm gonna die probably because I'm black. Because some cracker that knows I'm black better than you, nigga, is probably gonna put a bullet in the back of my head.
Hey, man, it's like this, man. It's like, you know, it's like it's revolution time, man. There's no questions asked. Revolution is here. You know what I'm saying? We the youth, we the young. It's time for us to break loose, you know? We don't have no freedom, no rights, man. We slaves right now. Everybody's still a slave. That's what they told us today. In other words, you still a slave. No matter how much money you got, you still ain't shit. So, you know, it's on, just like that. Just like
are really ready and willing to pay the price that is necessary for freedom. Our people will always be walking around here second-class citizens, or what you call 20th century slaves.
What price are you talking about, sir?
The price of freedom is death.
What's the figure?
I mean, what are you in this for? You want power, you want revenge, you know? What is it?
It's simple, Willie. I just want to be free.
Hey, peace to the family. I just want to be free, right? And freedom is going to take struggle. It's going to take the willingness to make sacrifices, and I'm all for it. And I hope that many more will be for it as well. My name is Ikemba Ajore of We Charge Colonialism. Today we are going to be diving back into black-on-black violence, quantifying the myth, statistics, and black criminality. This is Dr. Amos Wilson's text. Dr. Amos Wilson, one of our great thinkers and scholars, those who are in this movement of nation building, very familiar with Dr. Amos Wilson. But we have to get many more people to familiarize themselves with the work of Dr. Amos Wilson. When he was alive, his life work was dedicated to solving the problems of African people in America, in the diaspora, the rest of the diaspora, as well as the continent. Right, Dr. Amos Wilson covers the African experience in relation to Europeans and what that relationship has brought about through centuries of slavery and colonialism. And so this particular book is addressing the issue of intercommunal violence or horizontal violence that takes place within the Black community, which is sometimes characterized or labeled Black-on-Black violence, right? As if it's something that, as if intercommunal violence doesn't happen within other communities, right? The violence within our communities sort of gets emphasized. And there's a reason for that. And he gets into the reason for that in this book, right? There has to be this criminalization of Black people so that the ruling class, those people who are positions of power, can act criminally towards African people. So we're going to get into that today in this particular chapter 2. You can go back, if you haven't already, go back and check out the first podcast on this book where I covered chapter 1. I'm going to go through all of these chapters. I've been waiting a while to do this. I've been very busy. So there has been weeks between the last time I covered this book. So I'm really looking forward to getting into this discussion. Before we get into the book, Black-on-Black violence, I'm going to encourage everybody that taps in to like and share. That always helps. And subscribe to the channel if this is your first time being with us. Subscribe to the channel. Make sure you get those notifications. We're running podcasts throughout the week. Later on tonight, there will be a podcast on political prisoners, a political prisoners podcast. So you don't want to miss that. And Saturday, we're covering me, Frank, And Natasha may not be with us this week, but we usually cover several books. Well, we have been covering several books on Saturday during our We Charge Colonialism podcast and book club. So this Saturday at 10 a.m., we're going to continue to cover Set the World on Fire. So that's Saturday at 10 a.m. So, first thing I want to do a little promo. November 10th in Boston, the Malcolm X Symposium will be taking place. It is the 60-year anniversary of Malcolm X's message to the grassroots speech. Let me pull that up on the screen. So the Malcolm X Symposium honoring the 60-year anniversary of the message to the grassroots speech. That speech, which was given in Detroit. Part of that speech, he criticizes the March on Washington and how the masses who rose up against the system of oppression and exploitation and who were planning to go to Washington to let their voices be heard, how that movement, right, was undermined by the white left and the black bourgeoisie. So it's a powerful speech. If you've never heard the message to the grassroots, I would encourage you to check that speech out. You can check it out on YouTube if you need to. I'm going to put the link too for this in the chat so you can register at this link. Put that in there. And yeah, that's the link to the Eventbrite page. Again, this is taking place in Boston. Make sure you register and support. This particular symposium is going to be covering the 6 years that Malcolm was incarcerated, which took place which was in Massachusetts. That was the location of where he was incarcerated. So it's fitting that the symposium takes place in Boston. So hopefully you can make it if you're in the area. If you're out of the area, maybe you can plan to make a trip to Boston. So it's Malcolm X Symposium, honoring 60 years and message to the grassroots speech. All right. Yes. So again, we charge colonialism. And our platform is about sort of like accentuating the material contradictions that exist within society. And the way that we need to respond to those conditions is through revolutionary action, revolutionary behavior, which is going to take revolutionary consciousness. And, our platform is definitely about exposing those contradictions in society and inciting and sparking revolutionary consciousness and behavior. And revolutionary, behavior can come in many forms. It can look like this, creating platforms where we have these conversations. It can be creating institutions within your community to address colonial contradictions, right? Overturning those contradictions. But ultimately, it will need to lead to nation building. And so when we even look at this problem of black on black violence, in order to ultimately solve it, because the system, or intercommunal violence, I should say, the system itself benefits from the chaos that takes place within the black community. And one of the things we'll get into in this chapter, I'm not going to speak too much because I know in the chapter he's going to cover a lot of what I'm saying now. But there's a certain consciousness that has been developed and shaped by the relationship that African people have had with Europeans over the last several centuries. And we had to think and see the world in a particular way. Our reality had to be sort of shaped in a way where we don't see the social system or the society as a colonial system, as an imperialist, colonialist system. And it really, recently I was watching this movie called Hypnotic. And I'm not endorsing the movie. I'm still trying to get to the end of the movie. Ben Affleck is like the lead character in this movie. I think it just came out. And so far, I don't think the movie's that good. Maybe my mind will be changed. But I'm like more than halfway through it. But I'm bringing it up because in the movie Hypnotic, there's these people who have this power to speak to you and alter or manipulate your reality, so to put you under a hypnotic trance. So the way that you see the world has been altered and manipulated. So geography, time, perception, all of these things have been manipulated by the person who has put you under this hypnotic trance. And in the movie, there was a scene where the woman was making the point of not trying to stop trying. Ben Affleck was trying to bring the person out of his trance, and she was like, "It's too late. He's too far gone," right? And so, no matter what you say to that person, they only can see the world the way that they see it, right? Their consciousness has been completely altered. And it has me thinking about, African people under this system. And I wouldn't go too far as saying that we're far gone, but there's a lot of work. Some people will probably make that argument, right? But I won't make that argument. But I would say that there's going to be a lot of work needed to be able to combat what has been done to the consciousness of African people, because we sort of have this falsification of consciousness, as Dr. Amos Wilson gets to. So I'm going to get into this book, and since I was talking about this consciousness, I want to sort of start off with a short clip by Dr. Amos Wilson when he's talking about a new consciousness. So I'm going to share my screen.
A new consciousness, where African tradition now is a very difficult thing to call on, where we cannot call on our African gods, where we have not yet been able to use our African institutions as effectively as we used them before. Think about these ancestors as they moved into a whole new world, a whole new way of working, a whole new set of values, a whole new set of time systems, a whole new language system, economic system, social system, set of social relations, and so forth. And literally overnight, they're into this world. And think of the tremendous stress that was required for them to try to adjust as they saw their older systems no longer functional in the new world. We are still in that condition right now. We are still struggling with it today. How dare you then say that that's in the past and that has nothing to do with you? Ask yourself the question, why are you speaking the language we speak today? Is this an African language I'm speaking here now? Is this the language that we would have been speaking had we been on the other side of the veil? Is this a language that was forced upon our ancestors and our slave ancestors? And isn't this the same language you're speaking now? Then how do you say you are not connected with the slave experience when you speak a slave language at this very moment? Slavery was no mere taking advantage of the labor of black people, the mere use of black bodies. Slavery was a period of mass transformation of consciousness, was a transformation of culture, was a transformation of the African personality. Slavery involved the niggerization of African people. It involved opening up the African personality and interjecting in a possessing spirit that now we call nigga. We didn't know anything about nigga until we got over here.
Yeah, and that's a fact. We didn't know anything about. We have been created people. We've been doing our best to retain our Africanness, right, under the system of colonialism and imperialism. Peace to the family. Appreciate y'all tapping in. You know, I'm gonna go in. I got a lot of material, so I'm gonna try to get to it, man. I hope y'all appreciate it because I'm going to be jumping from from book to sort of newspaper article, and I'm a one-man army right now, so definitely bear with me as I go through this. So I think I'm gonna get into the reading right now. This is Quantifying the Myths, Statistics, and Black Criminality. So I won't go through the whole chapter, but I will. Let me rephrase that. I'm gonna go through the whole chapter, but I may skip around. So Quantifying the Myths, Statistics, and Black Criminality. And from an article, The City Sun, July 1824 to 1990, he begins the chapter with a quote from this newspaper. It says, within 5 years after the Civil War, the Black percentage of the prison population went from close to 0% to 33%. Then, as now, the Black prison population performed an economic and political function for the benefit of whites. All right. This is the second. This was a second quote. Then as now, this is separate quote. Sorry. Then as now, the Black prison population performed a economic and political function for the benefit of whites. This is Clinton Cox. Racism, the whole. I'm sorry, y'all. This is from the City Sun, but I think the title of the article is "Racism: The Hole in America's Heart" by Clinton Cox. And so this is the full quote. So within 5 years after the Civil War, the Black percentage of the prison population went from close to 0% to 33%. Then, as now, the Black prison population performed the economic and political function for the benefit of whites. And this is a great opening to this chapter, because throughout the chapter, Dr. Wilson is going to explain how criminality benefits the white power structure. And even, we go to the title of this book. The title of the book is Black on Black Violence, the Psychodynamics of Black Self-Annihilation in Service of White Domination, right? So this is the theme of this book right here. And once the masses of people become conscious of it, and us that are conscious of it, we have to be able to counter it, though. Like, what are we doing to counter it? What institutions, as far as educational institutions, what resources are we investing into to develop our own security, rather than having to rely on the oppressor to secure our communities, that which is a serious contradiction. So he's going to get into this. Eurocentric criminology, right? Crime and criminal behavior, regardless of temporal or cultural definition, occur not in a vacuum, but within a complex matrix of interpersonal, social, intergroup relations, and other equal psychological forces. Crime and criminality, their existential vicissitudes and emblematic meanings, can only be usefully and appropriately deciphered and pragmatically dealt with within the context of these forces. Crime and criminality are social phenomena and are reflective of the social system within which they occur. To discuss crime and criminality without reference to a social system is to engage in meaningless discussion. Yet this approach to the study of criminality is typical of much of the academic, criminological, and behavioral science theoretical writings. Academic emphasis on intropsychic and personality factors at the expense of extensive consideration consideration of the more important socioeconomic, social political factors as sources of criminal behavior makes academic criminologists, in effect, apologists and rationalizers for the white American-dominated political economic status quo. It must be recognized that both the intrapsychic and the personal are social products and are creatively reflective of their socio-political, socio-ecological, experiential, and environmental background. The idea of personality as relatively isolated and unreflected of its social, interactive history and environment as motivated by purely internal motives is an illusion. Moreover, such a concept is a dangerous myth and a psychological conspiracy perpetrated by the ruling groups in society to escape their responsibility for producing and perpetuating negative social forces which produce anti-social individuals and groups, right? And again, like this is really important, right? Individuals, criminals are not created in the vacuum, which he speaks to, right? Like, because when you individualize criminality, what you're doing is saying that there's something genetic or there's something innate or inherent about a people and the individuals that make up that collective. Well, what happens is when you have a bunch of individuals within the collective, then you kind of make it you generalize and act as if, okay, there's something innate about that social group, right? But then again, when you go to individualize it, you take the burden off of society, which is creating the criminals within the social system. Like just the same way that a social system creates teachers, creates bankers, right? What else? Astronauts, presidents, mayors, people who work in services, cooks, right? Just as it creates all of these people, what makes us think that the social system doesn't create criminals, right? These things do not happen in a vacuum. There's a particular force, a driving force that is at work, that is creating it. And it's groups of people. When you think about, there are people who are in positions, who are competing. There's this competition that is taking place within the system. And what happens when a person loses within a competition? They become unrecognized. There's less attention that is given to them, right? And these people have to find other ways to survive. The streets is sort of the extreme case, right? When you look at, even if you use sports as an analogy, if someone is playing sports all their life and wanting to play professional and get paid, what happens when they're competing with others and they just aren't quote unquote good enough? There could be other factors too, right, that prevent them from carrying on, but they're not able to, but they just don't make the cut, right? There's going to be a point where many of those people, they're going to have to find other ways to survive, right? So they look in different avenues. Maybe that person now becomes a teacher or something else, right? But what happens on a low level with the youth when they're competing in schools and so forth, and they're unable to measure up to some of the other students, and there's less attention that's given to them. So I'm not digressing, but I just want to make this point in regards to just like the social system. It produces the people within, or the individual personalities within the system. And so the criminal itself is a creation of the social system. There's some other points, but I think he's going to go further into some of these points that he made. He's going to deepen it a bit. So the disciplines of criminology, the behavior and social sciences, like all the other institutional disciplines in a racist class society, seek to rationalize and present an apologia for the political status quo without losing respectability. To accomplish this, they must, in effect, promote the decontextualization of crime and criminality. Yeah, that was another point, too, as far as, people become apologists for the system. When you take the burden off of the social system that's producing the criminals within this, quote unquote, criminals within the system, and you don't look to rectify or to transform the system so that it can so that it can produce people who are and we don't want to adjust to the system of colonialism, but this is just to say because the system is doing what it's supposed to do. But if the if the objective is to stop crime, you have to look at the system and see like what's going on within the system that keeps on producing people who are not able to adjust to the system. But what happens is like, okay, we have to create institutions that like crime is going to be a foregone conclusion, right? By people who are part of the ruling class who don't want to indict the system. And they say, hey, we just have to create institutions to deal with the criminals. Criminality is going to be, it's inherent, right? And so that's the problem. So when people are coming up with solutions to the problem, they're going to look for, ways. First, it's going to be like crime prevention, jails, more police, and also like trying to create some sort of social services to address people who have with this sort of proclivity to want to create, to want to commit crimes within society. Right. But it's all, it's a revolving door when you do that. Yeah. I'm going to put discouraged and displaced is what happens. The social systems create these feelings of inadequacy. Right. Absolutely. And it does that through the media all day. There's different ways that it creates these feelings of inadequacy. But it definitely does that through the media. Let's just use music for example. Through music, you see the entertainers, particularly like in hip hop culture, you kind of see this more than a lot of the other genres of music, right? Like you don't see jazz musicians doing this, but like in hip hop culture, you see this flaunting of these material things and things that they were able to get. And you have youth that are doing it, people who are 19, 20, 21 years old who are flaunting, having showing all of this money that they have, and they're generating all of this wealth, which is going to the colonizers, right? Most of that is going to the colonizers. But this perception of this perception that is projected to the rest of society creates this feeling of inadequacy because you don't have those things. And so now you want those things. You don't want it 10 years from now. You don't want it 15, 20. How can I get these things now? Right. And this is something that creates a criminal element as well, because now, because of this, you feel in this urgency to create, produce this wealth for yourself as an individual. You're looking to do it by all means, because you're like, the legal route is taking too long. So if you see people who are able to, generate or produce this wealth in their communities by selling drugs or other things, illegal measures, then you may, involve yourself in those sort of activities. But society won't look at that. They won't say that, there's a serious problem with projecting these images on the youth where they're feeling this inadequacy. Just think about it. The mind of the youth isn't fully developed. It's very impressionable, right? Years ago, they had issues with advertisements where corporations advertising to children, right? In some countries, it was illegal to advertise to children, and maybe still today, maybe in Europe, unless some laws have changed. But I know Europe a little longer than America. America changed that law, I think, back in the 70s or 80s, right? Where they're able to advertise to children at a certain age. But the concept now, because through social media, these phones, the world is able to come into the home and really manipulate children, right? And so, that's another problem. Maybe I'll touch on that again. But let me get back to that. But that was a great point that you had made. That is they tend, I'm on page 12. I don't know if you guys are following along, if you have the book, but page 12, the last paragraph, that is, they tend to divorce crime and criminality from their socio-ecological and psycho-historical context and present them as small group, subcultural, and personality problems. Standard explanations and approaches take crime out of the total context, which sires it, out of the political economic context, which gives it shape and form, and places it within the context of a mythical, quasi-inmate criminal personality class, subculture, or group. How one can have an innately criminal personality or be a member of a quasi-innately criminal or subcultural group when what is deemed criminal changes over time and place. Therefore, the definition of what may be called criminal today was not called so yesterday, nor will it be called such tomorrow, is rarely pragmatically and realistically dealt with. This is also the case with reference to which group defines what is deemed or not deemed criminal. How the ruling groups define and apply the criminal code, and how such definition and application by the ruling class may instigate criminality in segments of its subject population and inject a criminal implant in some of its constituent personalities as well, is very rarely discussed or examined by establishment criminologists. Right? Going back to this quotation in the beginning, we said within 5 years after the Civil War, the Black percentage of the prison population went from close to 0% to 33%. Right? Black people began, new laws was put on the books, Black codes, right, were created and was shaped in a way where it was going to criminalize the behavior of Black people. A group of people who was finding it difficult, right, to survive, already being marginalized within the social system, where they couldn't even survive, even doing things the legal way, because they were limited in where they could be, right, spaces that they can be in. And so they were sort of forced into survival mode. But survival mode within under this social system was going to be criminalized by the ruling class, who had the control over the resources that was needed for the Black community to survive. And it's the same today, the control over those resources. What Dr. Wilson makes the point of what is criminal can change over time, I think is a great point to be made, because, I mean, look at one point, the person who was the abuser of drugs could be looked at as a criminal at one point. But now, right, what is the conversation? The conversation is around drug abusers having mental health problems. And maybe, these people need to be in the mental health institution or seek some sort of therapy or mental help, rather than lock them up, right, and incarcerate them and make criminals out of them. Right. So this is how a system can make something, people can make something criminal in one context and not criminal in another context. Right. That's the power of the ruling class. So at its liberal best, establishment criminology, as intimated by Tony Platt in his article Prospects for Racial Criminology in the United States, is reformist. That is, it believes that it is possible to create a well-regulated, stable, and humanitarian system of criminal justice under the present economic and political arrangements. He goes on to say that establishment criminologists' reform proposals are invariably formulated within the framework of corporate capitalism and are designed to shape new adjustments to existing political and economic conditions. We might add at this juncture that establishment reform proposals are formulated and practically designed to shape African people's adjustments to existing and ongoing Eurocentric political and economic conditions, and more fundamentally to the conditions of white over Black, to the conditions of white supremacy. Platt further proposed that Eurocentric establishment reformism, quote, has helped to create probation and parole, the juvenile court system, reformatories and halfway houses, the indeterminate sentence, adjustment and diagnostic centers, public defenders, youth service bureaus, and other reforms which have served to strengthen the power of the state over the poor, third world communities, and youth. As the American Friends Service Committee has observed, the legacy of a century of reform effort is an increasingly repressive penal system and overcrowded courts dispensing assembly line justice. The above quotation applies that reform or charity under the aegis of the dominant white ruling class of white supremacy serves to maintain such dominance and supremacy. Reform is what reform does. If the institution of reform measures do not help to liberate the oppressed, and furthermore, actually worsens their oppression, then such measures functionally serve the power status quo. Criminal reformism, which does not make its objective the eradication of the criminogenic political economic system, is designed to put a benign face on racist ruling class oppression, to make oppression palliative to the oppressed. Prenti observes, quote, the United States locks up more people per capita for longer times than any other advanced industrial nation except South Africa. By 1985, there were more than twice as many Americans in prison than in 1970, and the numbers of police more than doubled between 1957 and 1977. Yet during this period, crime rates increased over 400%. Nor are the more punitive states like Texas safer than others. This is interesting right here. I didn't think about this before, but as I was just reading this, it made me think about South Africa today. And I didn't do the research on it. I did some research on the rate of people who were being locked up today as opposed to then. South Africa wasn't on that list. South Africa wasn't top 5 and maybe not top 10. And if anybody want to do a Google search and see where South Africa is on that list, you know, that would be great. But the top 5 was U.S. U.S. was number 1, and you had China. Where I write this at? U.S., Rwanda, Turkmenistan, El Salvador, and I didn't put 5 on. That was the top 4, but U.S. was number 1. And as far as prison population, I saw different numbers for prison population. One number I saw was the U.S. was number 1 with more than 2 million people in prison, 2,068,000, which was 25% of the world's population. 25% of the world's population. But another stat I saw which said that that was a 2021 number. I saw the stat for 2023 that said 1.68 million people, which would make them less than China. That would put China at number 1 with 1.69. But China has a population in the billions, right? So the rate is still higher as far as per capita. The U.S. is still higher than China, if those statistics is right. But if the 2 million is correct, that puts it ahead of China. But another statistic I looked at, the U.S. has over 5 million people that are tied to the system, whether they're incarcerated, probation, parole, and so forth, right? So more than 5. That's more people that was living under slavery in this country at the eve of the Civil War. More than 5 million people. But what's interesting to me as I was reading this, in this conversation, we're talking about criminology, right? And how people are criminalized. This said right here, it says that South Africa was the only state that locked up people more longer per capita. They were number 1 under apartheid. When apartheid ended, they're not even top 5, right? Because these white supremacists is no longer in power. If anything, like, this is a case study right here. Like, I'm sorry, the light bulb just went off, man. Like, this is a straight case study right here that shows what happens when African people comes in power. And as far as, like, you know, what is deemed criminal and who goes to jail and for how long they go to jail, because that's what it's about too. Like how long these people are, who's being incarcerated and the length of time they are serving in prison as opposed to other people. So you know, that's powerful. That's just something to like really you know, ponder. But I'm gonna keep it moving though. I'm going to keep it moving. So the major problem with which plagues establishment criminology, conservative, liberal, or otherwise, is that it is written and promulgated from the top down, written and practiced by an academic elite, criminological technocrats, namely consultants, judges, wardens, and others who have a vested interest in the regulation of crime and criminal activity. These persons are employed by the criminogenic system, which is the very source of much of the crime and criminality they write about and work at controlling. Yeah, like these people aren't trying to stop crime. They're coming up with different ways on, you know, how to address the crime that's going to take place, right? They're not trying to decriminalize people. They're writing about, you know, ways to you know, better should I say better punish, or you know, what type of consequences should they develop as far as addressing these criminals. I found essay was 259, and that's crazy. I'm looking at the number. Yeah, the US is 629. So keep that in mind. South Africa was more than and they don't have the exact number here, but South Africa was 1, and the United States was 2. More people longer time than any other advanced industrial nation except South Africa. South Africa was 1, and the US was 2. Now you have that number you gave me. South Africa is 259. The US is 600. I saw the number 629, 600, but there was an increase to 680 before COVID in 2019. 810. That's the number I saw. 810. That was in 2019. So there's different policies that are being enacted. Put that up. There's different policies. That's South Africa, 259 and 220. Indeed, discouragement displaces what happens. The social system creates these feelings of inadequacy. Yeah. 259. This is a case study. I'm gonna have to write a paper on this right now. I might have to write an article on this. Crime surges their interest because the prisons provide a source of labor. Absolutely. And I think like that's what Dr. Wilson is getting at right here too, as far as the people who these people have jobs as a result of the criminal element that exists within our communities. So they have an interest. They don't have an interest in stopping crime. All right. No, that looks right though. 259. I'm going to do some further research myself in that, but that could be the case. But we'll see. All right. So consequently, year after year, from the halls of academia, police desks, and judges' chambers, we are presented with tired, casual explanations of the factors which allegedly underlie criminal behavior: poverty, underemployment, broken homes, drugs, poor education, rising expectations, the age of anxiety, anomie, malaise, personality, ethnicity, community, instability, brain, biochemistry, and so on. But these explanations never satisfy, and the Black American community continues to see its collective life ooze away in a genocidal pool of blood. The case may be that these explanations, while not completely irrelevant and untrue, while providing some enlightenment and footing for the practical amelioration of crime and criminality in the African American community, may be but manifestations of a deeper, more profound set of variables. And it is. And again, like Dr. Wilson's touching on how everything is the problem. It's the individual, the family, everything but the social system, right? The social system doesn't need to change. It's something about the people. And I'm going to pull up this article just to give an example too of how this is still done. This is an article. Where is that? Hold on. Did I lose my article? Okay, the real root. Okay, here it is. The real root. For some reason, it's not showing up here. Oh, here it go. It's the first one. All right. Struggling. So this right here is an example of placing the blame on the individual and the family, right? Which doesn't exist in a vacuum, right? It exists within a social system. And it's always going to be this point in what they do. These people, these academics, these politicians, these quote unquote experts, what they do is they point to others who are within the social system, and they try to use them as examples of why it's you have to individualize it, because everyone isn't doing it, right? But everyone isn't becoming teachers. Everybody is making different decisions within the social system, based on, it could be circumstances, the environment, the relationship, everything, their life experiences, everyone's life experiences within the social system is going to, have a different effect on the individual and on families. And so, even when you look at, as far as environment, you go into suburban communities, how come there's more crime that happens, or violent crime that happens within inner cities than it does within the suburban communities? Or how come, and Dr. Wilson talks about this, I'll get to it in a minute, whites and blacks may commit the same amount of violent offenses, but how come the black community, within the black community, those violent offenses and more, and the violence tends to escalate more within the black community, right? And so on the surface, it will look like, okay, there's something wrong with black people, right? There's something, they have this proclivity to murder or be violent. But the reality is like, you have to look at the social context. And Dr. Wilson talks about how they attempt to decontextualize things, right? And if you was just to come into, if you was to come from another planet and come to the, it didn't have any context and came into our community, you would just say like, oh, there must be something wrong with these people, as opposed to everyone else, there must be something inherently wrong with them. But when you get the context and the history, you see that, these people have been created as a result of the colonial conditions that they are living in, right? As a result of not just colonialism, but also of racism, right? Patriarchy, all of these different systems that are used to limit the ability of a people to rise and to advance. So, going to this article, the real root causes of violent crime, the breakdown of marriage, family, and community. So I'm not going to go through the whole article, but I want to just maybe touch on a few points. Policymakers at last are coming to recognize the connection between the breakdown of American families and various social problems. The unfolding debate over welfare reform, for instance, has been shaped by the wide acceptance in recent years that children born into single-parent families are much more likely than children of intact families to fall into poverty and welfare dependence themselves in later years. These children, in fact, face a daunting array of problems. While this link between illegitimacy and chronic welfare dependency now is better understood, policymakers also need to appreciate another strong and disturbing pattern evident in scholarly studies: the link between illegitimacy and violent crime, and between the lack of parental attachment and violent crime. Without an understanding of the root causes of criminal behavior, how criminals are formed, members of Congress and state legislators cannot understand why whole sectors of society, particularly in urban areas, are being torn apart by crime. And without that knowledge, sound policy making is impossible, right? It's not colonialism, it's not capitalism, it's not racism, right? It's the family structure. These families, people are not, because they children are being born out of wedlock. You have illegitimate children out here. This is the reason that there's poverty and crime, increased crime within these communities, urban communities. Why are there illegitimate children? Why are there families being broken up? You know, that should be the next question. If this is the case, right? So then the next step is to address that. But is that going to be brought up in this article? Over the past 30 years, the rise in violent crime parallels the rise in families abandoned by fathers. High crime neighborhoods are characterized by high concentrations of families abandoned by fathers. State-by-state analysis by heritage scholars indicate that a 10% increase in the percentage of children living in single-parent homes leads typically to a 17% increase in juvenile crime. The rate of violent teenage crime corresponds with the number of families abandoned by fathers. The type of aggression and hostility demonstrated by a future criminal often is foreshadowed in unusual aggressiveness as early as age 5 or 6. The future criminal tends to be an individual rejected by other children as early as the first grade, who goes on to form his own group of friends, often the future delinquent gangs. Man, these people, boy. Yo. And then it goes in contrast, with neighborhoods that I guess, they have the opposite sort of structure, family structures, and how they have different results, right? So in this article, they make a critique of politicians as far as like how they're just like missing, how they're out of touch on what the problem really is. Let me see if it gets into it right here. Official Washington's view of crime. The professional literature in criminology is quite at odds with orthodox thinking in official Washington. Many lawmakers in Congress and in the states assume that the high level of crime in America must have its roots in material conditions, such as poor employment opportunities and a shortage of adequately funded social programs. Oh, but no, that's not the problem, right? And I don't, this as far as social programs, like these things can address the problem. They can sort of alleviate or ameliorate the problem. It's not going to wipe the problem. It's not going to completely solve the problem, and it's not going to, I think it will solve the problem for some people, but the masses of people, and unless they create institutions for the masses of people and put funding in it, right? But that will be some sort of reparations, right? When they're able to address the whole, the masses in the community, but they don't, right? And then, what is the problem? These social services, what type of, it's sort of a Band-Aid too. If you look at some of the policies and resources that they make available, it kind of, it's enough to pacify you and, help, I guess, alleviate, again, like sort of alleviate the pain, right? You're still suffering, you're still in pain, right? But it's not as bad as it was before because of, these safety valves that are put in. So, but it's critiquing, these people are critiquing, they're saying like the prevalent research is saying that no, like this is the problem, the family structure, the illegitimacy that's taking place within these black, well, it doesn't say black, but inner city, you know, they use certain language, but they're saying within the black community. Because I have another article that I will show that is from the same, this is Heritage Fund, they're very conservative, but from the same think tank, who says that most of the crime is being committed and those who are suffering, the statistics say is the black community. So this is what we're talking about here. So this view blinds policymakers to the personal aspects of crime, including moral failure. You see that these people don't have any morals. The refusal to exercise personal responsibility. This is the problem. And the inability or refusal to enter into family and community relationships based on love, respect, and attachment, both to the broader community and to a common code of conduct, right? So again, I'm not going to, I don't think I need to read any more of it. I'm going to get back to the book. But this is a think tank that has influence on policymakers and has influence on policy, right? They're putting out these articles, and there's more. I have a couple of more from the same think tank that I can show. And there's others that have the same sentiment, right? You see who the problem is. It's something, black folks, it's something about, you know, you not wanting to take up personal responsibility and your morals, all of that, right? But Dr. Amos Wilson, he's going to, and he has been, and he's going to continue to attack this. There's a book that I'm reading now, and I'm just getting into it, but reading this book brought me to it, Blaming the Victim. So he's going to discuss this book in a minute, but it's a pretty good book. I've been reading it for the last couple of days, and I'm going to continue to dive into that. So the major problem, oh, no, I'm over here. Crime in the black community. It is now time for the African-American community to provide solutions to the criminal problems which beset it and which threaten its very survival. Criminality in the African-American community is not merely the subject matter for theoretical debates, nor merely the stuff of scholarly treatises. It is a matter of life and death. The following statistics, I want to highlight that, talk about that, because that sense of urgency, when I've come across something that's talking about like sense of urgency, I need to highlight that. So criminality in the African-American community is not merely the subject matter for theoretical debates, nor merely the stuff of scholarly treatises. It is a matter of life and death. The following statistics taken from the National Urban League's The State of Black America 1988 indicate the serious nature and urgency of black-on-black crime. In 1986, blacks comprised approximately 12% of the United States population. Yet during that year, blacks accounted for 46.5% of all arrests for violent crimes. Of the persons arrested for murder in 1986, blacks accounted for 48% of the total. That same year, blacks accounted for 46.6% of all arrests for rape, 62% of all arrests for robbery, 39.8% for assaults, 29.5% for burglary, 30.1% for theft, and 34.7% for auto theft. In respect to city arrests, blacks accounted for 30.8% of the total arrests made in 1986. Of the number of city arrests made for violent crimes, murder, forcible rape, robbery, and aggravated assault, that year, blacks accounted for almost half, 49.5%, 34.3% for property offenses, burglary, larceny, theft, motor theft, and arson. With respect to persons under 18 years of age who were arrested, blacks made up 25.1% of the total arrests made in 1986. In addition, blacks accounted for 54.9% of those under 18 who were arrested for violent crimes, 27.1% for property offenses, and 30.3% of all index crimes during 1986. All right. As far as disproportion hasn't changed this day to this day. I was looking at a statistic. Black people represent, in the United States, black people are more than, I think, close to half the people, 49% or 50%, maybe more than 50%. I have it here. Of those And these are black non-Hispanic, right? So even if we were, because some of you got some Afro-Latinos out here, I don't care if they consider themselves black or not, but you're talking about more than 50% of the population incarcerated that are in federal custody or federal prisons are black people. And that's today. This is a recent statistic. How do we represent, black people represent more of the population of those in federal custody than white people, right? That's a serious contradiction. But I think, again, like this is, exposing the nature of this system and how it preys on the black community. And what Dr. Wilson is going to get into as far as these statistics, how these statistics can be misleading and how statistics can be used to sort of paint this broad brush over a community, because we look at the numbers of people who are incarcerated or arrested, it doesn't take into account the other groups of people who may be committing the crimes at the same rate or more, but are not either not incarcerated, or if they are incarcerated for a lesser amount of time than those of the black community, which skews the numbers. So it doesn't look as if these other groups of people are creating crimes at the same rate or even higher. So that's how the black community becomes unjustly criminalized, and it sort of perpetuates the type of sentences and punishments that are given to black people as a result of these skewed numbers. But he's going to articulate this probably better than I am right now. I know he is. Incarceration. The number of blacks in prison as compared to the numbers of blacks in the population is a second method of assessing crime and its relationship to Afro-Americans. The latest prisoner survey, which was conducted on December 31st, 1984, showed that there was a total of 462,422 prisoners in state and federal institutions. Of that number, 209,673, or 45%, were black. With respect to federal institutions, 10,786 out of the total population, 34,263 were black, constituting 31%. Out of the 428,179 in state institutions, 198,887, or 46%, were black. So I'm gonna move away from the numbers for a second. I'm gonna go down here to victimization. Surveys reveal the following: while whites are more vulnerable to personal theft, blacks are more vulnerable than whites to violent crime. A higher percentage of black households than white or other minority households are touched by crime. Blacks had the highest victimization rates for rape, robbery, and assault. Blacks are more likely to be victims of violent crime than whites or members of other racial groups. Young black males had the highest violent crime rates based on the number of vehicles owned. Black heads of household were victims of motor vehicle theft at a higher rate than whites or members of other minority groups. Most violent crimes against blacks were committed by black offenders, 84%. Of all black households in 1985, 27% had been touched by crime. 2 years later, black households continued to be more vulnerable than whites for violent crime, 5.4% versus 4.6%. And then you have burglary, theft, and so forth. The chances of a person, black or white, being the victim of a crime is directly related to family income. The lower the income, the greater the chances of victimization. As for specific types of crime, the typical American has a 1 in 133 chance of being murdered. However, for black males, the chances are 1 in 21. The leading cause of death among black males between the ages of 15 and 24 years of age is homicide. Approximately 42 per 100,000 blacks between the ages of 15 to 24 die from homicide. This compares with about 8 per 100,000 whites in the same age group. For nearly all age groups, however, homicide victimization rates do not differ significantly, even though they are considerably fewer blacks than whites nationwide. And then he goes into the drug problem But I want to go down here to when he talks about so-called white-collar crime. And actually, this book influenced me to begin to do a segment on quote-unquote white-collar crime. And so I'm going to begin that in November. You'll see me do a series covering corporate criminals, right? In cases that may be pending, or people who may have already been found liable for a crime, and how a lot of these people don't even do any time when we talk about these white-collar crimes, or if they do crime. If they do time, it's for far less. The punishment is far less severe than a street level crime, which Dr. Wilson talks about. Someone who may have been embezzling, stole tens of millions of dollars, may serve 6 months in prison. And there's cases where people have served more and may be on probation or whatever. But someone who may have stolen a TV will get a year in prison, 5 years probation, right? Like there's plenty of examples of street level crimes where the offense or the value of what was stolen or damaged could be in the hundreds or even thousands, but where someone who committed a crime such as embezzlement or what's the other, money laundering or something with millions of dollars, and these people, hardly do any time, if they do time at all. And of course, like there's cases, there's exceptions. I know people who've done 10, 20 years, yeah, but usually they get a pardon, right? After 2 years, they get a pardon from the governor or president, right? Ain't no pardons for that for that petty thief who stole that TV. So-called white-collar crime is ordinarily not even counted. And again, peace to the family. Appreciate y'all tapping in too. I see y'all going in there. Chat, yeah. Let's see what's going on here. Yeah, crime is just rebellion without politics, and a criminal ain't nothing but somebody who don't submit to the control of these colonizers. Make the stats look different when we think about that too. Yeah, indeed, right? And any resistance to this system is going to be deemed criminal. You have to break some laws to free yourself. Even those people with Dr. King and all of those people who those protests, they had to break the law in order for them to do those marches and protests, right? So even don't think that they was out there getting permits too. Sometimes they would get permits, and sometimes it would be controlled. But when you look at some of those marches in Selma and Montgomery, they took it into their own hands. They took destiny into their own hands, and I would wish I would have seen a lot more of that being done at that time. Yeah. It's by design. They didn't end slavery. They remixed it. Definitely did. And this goes back to what I was talking about earlier. That movie Hypnotic, right? And so far, I don't like the movie. I think it's terrible, but I am going to watch it to the end. Maybe it will get better. But going back to that film where the person is able to alter or manipulate a person's perception, their reality, their geography. They're able to manipulate time for them, where it could be 2:00, but they think it's 4:00. They could be they're looking at the clock and it says 4:00, based on how they have been manipulated. That's the same thing with African people. Our time has been, manipulated. And I know some of you, jumped on a little late, but in the beginning, I was playing Dr. Amos Wilson, and he was talking about slavery when Black people were enslaved, and even colonialism. But their whole culture was uprooted. It was disrupted. And so they were placed in a context, in a situation where they had to adjust. They had to adjust to this new social system that was created. And so they begin to see the world a whole lot differently than they would see the world. And even to this day, we still impacted. Just from, the examples is just from the language that we speak, right? Speaking the colonizers' language, some of the religious practices that we have, the very education that we receive under, this colonial education, all of these things are examples. But the point I'm making is, going back to what you said, they didn't end slavery, they remixed it. And what it is too, we have, our consciousness has been, manipulated to where we don't see slavery. Like how you say they remixed it. We actually, we can't even see, we don't see the situation as colonialism because we've been educated and indoctrinated to see it differently. Like our reality has been completely influenced, largely influenced by Europeans and Euro-Americans. And it's going to take a shift in consciousness. We need to develop our consciousness to see the world for what it really is, and see colonial system as a colonial system, not a democratic system. We really believe in, well, a lot of people, really believe that, this is democracy. They can't see fascism when it rears its head, But yeah, great, point. Just want to go through some of these. Appreciate y'all tapping in. And the destruction of the African family with the abandonment and sale of Black children by white rapist fathers started with slavery. That's a fact. Started with slavery, but it didn't end, right? Still going on. I think, and a lot of these things we don't really think is going on because again, it's not in front of us. I think that's has a lot to do with media manipulation and how our ability to see the world for what it really is being limited through the media, and not just mainstream media. I think social media as well. And people think that Instagram, YouTube, not everybody, but some of us think that these messages are not being censored and being restricted. They are, algorithm and all of that. I truly believe that. There's a book on that, as a matter of fact. What is the book on that? Like algorithms, racism. I'm trying to remember the name of it. But maybe it will come to me. But let me jump back into this. Where I want to jump to. Oh, yeah, so-called white collar. Let me finish this. So-called white collar crime is ordinarily not even counted as crime. This is important, even though its perpetrators are specifically known to criminal justice officials. Though corporate crime, which robs Americans of billions of dollars, endangers the health and destroys the lives of millions of Americans and non-Americans, such activities are not often perceived as crime. While whites commit the majority of crime in America, crime, particularly crime in the streets, is seen as an African-American monopoly. Ryan very pointedly reports that out of the total spectrum of crime, very little is committed in the streets. The hue and cry in America for law and order is essentially a white American coded plea for containment of alleged Black criminality and ultimately a plea for containment of the African-American community. And I think this too kind of, there's some other things as I read, he's going to deepen this, but it's just a thought that I had in regards to the manipulation, how the stats, right, can be misleading. The crime that is taking place outside of the Black community that is not being criminalized, right, or the offenders are not going to jail or receiving light sentences. How this skews the statistics. So when you hear a number like 40% of Black people are committing such and such, the numbers are that high because most of the crime that's being committed is not being either reported or the perpetrators are not suffering any consequences as a result of the crime that they're committing. So that 40% seems very high, because of that. But in reality, that 40%, if all of the crime that is being committed is really being addressed, then that 40% may go to 5%. It may go to 2%. You know what I'm saying? So this is why it's important to understand how colonialism and racism has a tremendous impact on, who is being targeted and who is being sort of labeled criminal within the social system. So I hope that makes sense, man. How these numbers, this is what Dr. Wilson is like really getting at. Again, quantifying a myth, statistics, and Black criminality. The trouble with the official crime picture is that it has the effect of grossly distorting the average citizen's image of what crime is all about, right? You think of crime, what image comes to mind, right? The image of a white, a man in a suit and a tie is not going to come to mind, right? We'll probably have an image, just like you have an image. You think of an angel. I'm generally speaking too. I don't want to offend my African minded people who are tuning in, but we know the story. Most people who haven't come into consciousness, man, they picture an angel. They'll probably picture a white angel. They picture a criminal. They probably picture a young Black boy with sagging jeans, right, and a baseball cap and a hoodie on. That's the nature of the beast, man. It minimizes and deflects attention from one kind of crime, the common kind that one's neighbors commit, and exaggerates the spotlights another less common kind. The code name is crime in the street, which is presumably committed by criminals. Ryan asks, why does the American public respond so strongly to the issue of law and order? There are at least two reasons. One is that the myopic view represented in the conventional wisdom about crime seems to provide at least some vague rationale for the task we set for our police. And it is comforting to keep the illusion that police are engaged in law enforcement. Another is that it permits us to keep believing that crime is fertilized by the slums and nurtured by low socioeconomic status. We can then go on talking about some mythical separate group of criminals, most of whom, of course, are poor or Black or both, as dangerous and threatening to the life of the community. We do this through the device of defining as criminal only persons arrested by police. Man. Yo, Dr. Wilson, boy, I swear, I wish this ancestor was still with us. Man. A set of studies shows that there is no substantial relationship between social class and the commission of crimes, but there is a very marked relationship between class and conviction for crime. Read that again. A set of studies shows that there is no substantial relationship between social class and the commission of crimes, right? So I don't care what social class I met those millionaires or middle class, wealthy class. It don't matter. There hasn't been anything that shows that there's any relationship, right? At least substantial relationship. He says, but there is a very marked relationship between class and conviction of crime. The lesson of all this is plain. The fact that half or more of the persons arrested for crimes of personal violence, and that 40 to 50% of all prisoners in jails and penitentiaries are Black, says nothing at all about the criminality of Black people, and that an even higher proportion of persons arrested are poor and in prison sheds no light whatever on the criminality of the poor. These facts only identify the objects of police and court activity. There are laws violators and there are law violators. One kind gets arrested, the other kind is usually left alone. The major determinant of police action is not so much the commission of a crime as the identity of the supposed criminal. We must judge why we hire the policeman by the evidence. Presumably, we hire them to do what they, in fact, do: arrest Black people and poor people. In functional terms, it would be hard to evade the conclusion that the major task we give to our police is to control potentially disruptive or troublesome groups in the population. All right. So what I'm gonna do, I want to play Dr. Amos. I tapped in today at 1, and it's 2:20 now, so I don't want to go too much longer. I thought I was gonna finish this, but what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna do another part of this chapter and finish it up then, because I do have a couple of more articles that I wanted to go through, and be honest, it'll take up a whole lot of time. But what I want to do is Dr. Amos Wilson, let me pull this up. He's talking about self-aggression, and you know, it's fitting for the title of this book: Black on Black Violence, the Psychodynamics of Black Self-Annihilation in Service of White Domination. So he's going to speak to that in this particular clip. All right.
To maintain this system, we have let ourselves become possessed by a spirit such that when we become aggressive, we aggress against the self instead of those who are the source of our aggressive orientation. We talk a lot as a people about self-hatred. Self-hatred is a personality configuration. It is a form of personality organization. It is an orientation toward the world and toward oneself. Self-hatred, then, is the white man's greatest protection against being destroyed by the Black man. To a good extent, self-hatred is the white man's defense mechanism, is the white man's form of self-defense. How can we say that? To a great extent, one function of the personality is to direct energy, to direct aggression, to channel aggression and energy and wishes and impulses in particular directions, to organize feelings, to organize energy, to achieve certain ends. Those things that we hate, often then when we are angry or hostile, we aggress against them, don't we? We attack them often. We destroy them. Then we have a problem, don't we? If we attack the things we hate, if we attack the things toward which we hold hostility, when we are overly frustrated and when we are angry, then what happens if that thing we hate is ourselves? It means then, ladies and gentlemen, that when we become frustrated and angered as a people, when we are overwrought by feelings of hostility, and our self-hating personality seeks to channel that hostility and channel that aggression, it's going to channel the aggression right back on to the self, because that's the thing we hate most. So consequently, Consequently, black anger then becomes a conduit for black self-destruction, for black self-defeat. The object of our hostile, aggressive feelings becomes ourselves. And you can see then how the white man is protected by that personality structure, right? While he stokes our anger, while he stokes our hostility, while he stokes our frustration, and while we get mad and we want to strike out, when we decide to strike out and aggress.
Yeah, I realized that I put myself on mute. Oh man, I thought the volume would be louder if I went on mute, but I was making the point of what Dr. Wilson is talking about as far as the aggression. I was sort of like just touching on consciousness again. That going back to what I was speaking on before. If we if this is another reason why our consciousness have to be manipulated, because if we see the system as a colonial system and the colonizer as colonizers, then our aggression would be directed towards the system and those people who are colonizing us. And so it's imperative to those people who are in power to make sure that they shape our consciousness so that we can see our reality different. They have to dictate our reality. They have to shape it. And so it also works, and it also works when there's that when we become detached from who we are in our history, our identity, when our identity becomes shaped by the system and those people who are in power. So we become detached from being African people. The people who came over on the ships and on those slave ships and was brought into the Americas, those people who were colonized on the continent and in other places and is still suffering from colonialism, we have to be detached from our ancestors who went through that experience, those African people. Because think of it, if we was attached, if we looked at those people as our ancestors and we're a continuation of that, why would we want to be a part of a system where the people who put them through that is in control? Why would we integrate into that system? So, these things are at play. We have to be detached from this history of slavery and colonialism, from being African. And so a new person has to be born with no history, with no identity. And that's where we are at now. And I'm saying as a people, we have an identity that was we forged this identity under the system of colonialism, but is one that sort of aligns with the system of colonialism. When you talk about creating an African nation, you talk about nationhood. What comes with that is the creation of a new identity, a new people are going to be born through revolution. But I think it has to be rooted in our history, in our experiences, which goes back to Africa. So I'm going to let this play out, and then
we strike out and aggress.
Oh, I'm gonna let this play out, and then there's something I wanted to read from the Falsification of African Consciousness. I wanted to close out with that because it's going to speak to this identity.
The self. And by doing so, he is left untouched and unscathed. And therefore, our self-hatred becomes his principal means of defending himself and of maintaining himself. One of the things that frightened him most about the Ferguson case was that Ferguson's self-hatred mechanism broke down. Unlike many deaf, dumb, and blind Negroes, he knew who his enemies were. And so when he got angry and hostile, instead of going out to drink himself to death,
reactionary suicide,
instead of going out to smoke crack and destroy himself,
right,
instead of going out to killing someone who looked like himself, instead of going out to commit suicide and put himself in a place to be destroyed by somebody else, he went directly to the source of his frustration.
Yep. Went directly to the source. So I'm going to share. I'm going to stop that. Last thing I want to touch on is a section out of the Falsification of African Consciousness right here. Yeah. Again, appreciate everybody for tapping in this afternoon. Some of you probably at work doing all types of things, I know, on a Friday. So I'm going to get into this, and then we can close it out. The political economic necessity of madness. While mental problems, juvenile, make sure. Yep. While mental problems, juvenile delinquency, and other problems may flow from family relations, we must recognize that relations existing within a family structure are themselves shaped by the political situation in which they are embedded, right? And this goes back to the article that I read earlier when they were talking about the real problem with violence, right? And they was talking about the family structure and illegitimacy. Remember that? So we're going to get an African, center perspective on this. The relationship between the Black mother and child, the Black father and child, the politics that go on within the Black family structure, the politics of color, the politics of quality of hair, the politics of sexuality, and so forth that exists within the Black family reflect to a very great extent the politics of the larger white-dominated society in which the Black community finds itself. If an effort is made to get at the roots of mental problems and of other kinds of problems that exist within the African American individual and community, it must begin with an analysis of the political context in which they coexist. It must start with the recognition of the fact that juvenile delinquency, criminality, mental problems, family problems, and other kinds of problems which are prevalent in our community are social necessities, are political necessities. We have stated before that in order for us as a people to be in the situation we are in and not be in concentration camps and not have guns pointed at our heads throughout the day, we must be maintained in a particular state of mind. In a sense, then, we literally must be out of our minds, and we must be kept out of our minds. Mental maladaptiveness among our people is a political, social necessity, and therefore is instigated by political, social forces. And a Black psychology must begin with this very fact. This political necessity is in part based on the demographic fact that the European is approximately 10% of the world's population. The European inhabits only a small part of this globe. The part of the globe that the European occupies are relatively resourceless when compared to those occupied by non-European people. And yet the European is saddled with great wealth, economic and political power. He controls the globe and maintains the world in a state of terror and has the earth now on the brink of suicide. We must question, how is it that a minority people, a very small percentage of mankind, a people who are essentially resourceless in terms of their natural resources, maintain the power they have? Why is it that peoples whose land contain the wealth of the earth are the poorest people? Why is it that Africa, with some 20 or 30 strategic metals that make the space age possible, why is it that the image of Africa is projected at us time and time again as that of starving children, as societies in disorder, as societies on the verge of disaster? This implies, to my mind, that there must exist a political, social situation wherein the mental orientation of our people must be so structured that the power and the ability of the Europeans to rule the earth are continually maintained. To a good extent, people are kept out of their minds by means of contradictions and conflicts, where the mind is faced with what appears to be unresolvable problems and dilemmas and seeks often to escape those contradictions, either through the creation of illness, misbehavior, or other, often through grabbing on to one of the horns of the dilemma, extreme conformity, or through extreme rebellion, all of which are designed ultimately to maintain the status quo. For the European to rule the world as he does today, or at least to intimidate it as he does, contradictions must be a chronic part of the lives of the non-European people, as well as that of the European. The imperialistic European must essentially function in a very devilish fashion, that is, in a fashion that uses deception as its major characteristic. Consequently, fundamental values and ways of seeing reality must be reserved. The good must appear to be the bad, the light dark. Truth must be taken for the lie for truth. Otherwise, a small group, such as European people, cannot continue to keep the rest of the world out of his mind. Right. So I wanted to end it with that. I could keep going on because Dr. Wilson, bar after bar, in the next paragraph, he's going to go in even more. And I'm not going to want to stop reading because, it's so powerful. And I think it's important, though, that we go over these texts over and over again, because we have to embody these ideas. We have to, I think we have, when it comes to the Garveys, the Malcolm X's, Kwame Ture's, and Nkrumah's, Dr. Amos Wilson's, like, we have to embody these ideas, and it will help us develop even more powerful, polished ideas for the time that we're in today, right? Because unfortunately, those people that I just named aren't here today to be able to experience the world. But we can take these theories and these ideas and be able to, with our own experiences, be able to develop them and shape them to the reality that we're facing day in and day out, right? To solve these contradictions, because fundamentally the material conditions have not changed, and fundamentally what needs to be done to liberate ourselves hasn't changed either. At the end of the day, it has to be about nation building. And we have to be revolutionary minded. And one of the last things I'll say, what Dr. Wilson touched on, is that the very structure of our communities has to be in a way where it will contribute, or it will help maintain the social system, the colonial capitalist system that we're a part of. And so there has to be a revolution within our culture, within our communities, because the structure that we have now and what we're doing now is only going to deepen our oppression and exploitation. So that's where the revolution is going to begin. Want to appreciate everybody again for tapping in. It's 2:38. I think I'll tap back in next Friday, hopefully, if I'm not in the streets, doing some organizing. I'll see you next Friday, probably at the same time, 1 p.m. So again, appreciate everybody for tapping in. Revolutionary suicide, yes, indeed. And Dr. Wilson, he was talking on in that clip. He said, "My brother, he didn't act in a reactionary way and smoked himself to death." Let me share that real quick. Hoodoo. It's now 2:30 p. Oh, we can now. Nah. You trying to go to the top of the hour? Nah, I'm only because I got some stuff to do myself, man. I ain't gonna lie, I got some papers to grade, some work to do. But I will tap back in. Tap in tomorrow though, 10 a.m. Eastern time. I'll be here with Frank, and we're gonna be looking at Set the World on Fire, Dreams of Liberia. We're gonna look at that. We're gonna continue to read that book. So that's tomorrow, 10 a.m. So if anybody has the time, make sure that you tap in tomorrow. Make sure you follow us. We Charge Colonialism, all platforms. And make sure if this is your first time tapping into the podcast, subscribe to the channel. And again, this November 10th, the information you can find on We Charge Colonialism as well. But this November 10th in Boston is going to be the 60-year anniversary of the Malcolm X grassroots speech. The Malcolm X Symposium is going to be taking place. So you want to make sure that you register and attend that as well. All right, family. Sometimes when I do these, I don't want to leave you guys, man. But, we got to come to a close at some point. All right, so peace and have a revolutionary day.